Some discoveries don't fit into any history book. A footprint sealed inside ancient rock. A human bone buried where no human should exist. Marks in stone that look like machines passed through thousands of years too early. Objects like these aren't myths. They were found, recorded, and then slowly pushed into the background because no one knew what to do with them. We're walking through caves, deserts, mountains, and frozen lands to uncover traces of people and events that challenge everything we think we know about the past. For if you enjoy drifting into deep mysteries and quiet stories that stay in your mind long after the screen goes dark, make sure you're subscribed before this video ends. Laetoli in the first path of humanity. On the wide and open plains of northern Tanzania, where golden grass moves slowly under warm African winds and distant volcanic hills rest quietly against the horizon, there exists a place that appears simple and empty to the casual observer, yet beneath its soil lies one of the most important and emotional records of human history, a silent pathway preserved in stone and ash that tells the story of how our earliest ancestors first learned to walk upright and begin the long journey towards civilization. More than 3.5 million years ago, long before cities, writing, machines, or even complex tools existed, this region was part of a vast natural world filled with forests, wetlands, grazing animals, and dangerous predators, where survival depended entirely on awareness, cooperation, and the ability to adapt to constantly changing conditions. During this distant era, nearby volcanoes regularly released fine clouds of ash into the atmosphere, which settled gently across the land and mixed with light rainfall to form soft surfaces capable of capturing even the smallest impressions made by passing creatures. On one such day, after ash had fallen and rain had lightly moistened the ground, a small group of early human ancestors walked slowly across this fragile surface, leaving behind a trail of footprints that would later become one of the most important scientific discoveries ever made. They moved forward calmly and steadily, placing one foot in front of the other with balance and confidence, unaware that every step they took would be preserved for millions of years beneath layers of sediment and stone, waiting patiently for future generations to uncover. These footprints reveal that the walkers placed their heels first, transferred their weight smoothly across the foot, and pushed forward with their toes, demonstrating a fully developed walking pattern almost identical to that of modern humans, proving that upright movement had already become a natural and essential part of their lives. At least 2, and possibly 3 individuals walked together along this path, remaining close to one another as they crossed the open landscape, suggesting strong social bonds and mutual protection in an environment where isolation could easily lead to death. One set of footprints appears larger, while another appears smaller, leading researchers to believe that this may have been a parent walking alongside a child, or an adult accompanied by a younger companion, offering a rare and deeply emotional glimpse into early family life. At the time these footsteps were made, Laetoli was home to elephants, antelope, rhinoceroses, ancient horses, and large predators such as saber-toothed cats and hyenas, creating a world filled with both opportunity and danger, where survival required constant alertness and cooperation. These early ancestors, known today as Australopithecus afarensis, had small brains compared to modern humans, yet possessed bodies perfectly adapted for life on the ground, with aligned knees, curved spines, and balanced hips that allowed them to walk efficiently across long distances. Although they had not yet developed advanced tools or permanent shelters, they compensated through observation, memory, communication, and shared experience, forming the earliest foundations of human society. For centuries, scientists believed that intelligence and large brains developed before upright walking, assuming that humans first became thinkers and only later became walkers. But the discovery of the Laetoli footprints, completely transformed this understanding by proving that movement came before complex thought, and that walking upright was the first major step toward becoming human. By freeing their hands, upright walking allowed these ancestors to carry food, protect infants, use simple tools, and communicate through gestures, slowly reshaping their relationship with the environment and with each other. Over millions of years, this simple change in posture would eventually lead to art, language, science, and civilization itself. When the footprints were discovered in the late 1970s by a research team led by Mary Leakey, scientists immediately recognized their extraordinary importance because they were not studying bones or fossils, but actual moments of life preserved in motion. Unlike skeletons, which show how someone looked, footprints show how someone lived, how they moved, how they balanced, and how they interacted with others. Modern researchers have used advanced scanning technologies, pressure modelling, and experimental walking studies to analyse these prints in extreme detail, confirming that the walkers possess stable, efficient, and natural gaits similar to our own. These studies continue to refine our understanding of early human anatomy and behaviour, revealing that humanity's basic physical form was established far earlier than once believed. Yet despite all scientific analysis, the true power of Laetoli lies not in measurements or data, but in its emotional connection to the present. Standing on this ancient land today, looking across the same plains and distant hills, it is impossible not to imagine those early ancestors walking quietly through their world, searching for food, water, and safety, unaware that their simple journey would one day become the foundation of human history. They did not know they were beginning anything. They were not trying to leave messages. They were simply living. And yet, through their footsteps, they left behind proof that humanity began not with monuments or empires, but with cooperation, movement, and the courage to walk forward together into an unknown future. Laetoli reminds us that before we built cities, before we wrote stories, before we explored the stars, we first learned how to stand, how to balance, and how to take one step at a time across a changing world. Every road, every journey, every civilization that followed began here, in soft volcanic ash, beneath open African skies, with a small group of beings who chose to walk side by side and trust the path ahead. The giant skeleton of Castelnau and the forgotten question of human size. In the quiet countryside of southern France, near the small town of Castelnau-le-Lez, where vineyards, limestone hills, and slow-moving rivers shape a peaceful landscape, there once occurred a discovery in the late 19th century that challenged scientific thinking, public imagination, and accepted views of human history. A discovery that even today continues to raise uncomfortable questions about what we truly know regarding our ancient past. In the year 1890, while workers were excavating sediment layers in the region for geological and archaeological study, fragments of unusually large human bones began to emerge from deep underground deposits that dated back tens of thousands of years, immediately attracting the attention of scholars, collectors, and museum authorities across Europe. These remains included parts of a skull, large femur bones, sections of arms, and fragments of a jaw, all of which appeared far larger and heavier than those of an average modern human, suggesting that the individual to whom they once belonged may have stood well over 2 meters in height, possibly approaching 3 meters according to some early estimates. The discovery was carefully documented by Georges Vacher de la Puge and later examined by Professor Paul Raymond, who reported that the bones were found embedded within Pleistocene sediment layers alongside fossilized animal remains, indicating great antiquity and ruling out the possibility of a recent burial. Measurements taken at the time suggested that the femur alone was significantly longer and thicker than that of modern humans, leading some researchers to propose that the skeleton may have belonged to an exceptionally large prehistoric human, possibly representing a now extinct branch of humanity. Newspapers across France and neighbouring countries quickly picked up the story, describing the remains as evidence of ancient giants, reigniting legends and myths that had existed for centuries in European folklore about towering human-like beings who once walked the earth. These legends, found in medieval texts, biblical stories, and local traditions, had long been dismissed as symbolic or fictional, yet the Castelnau discovery seemed, at least temporarily, to offer physical proof that such stories might contain fragments of forgotten truth. However, within academic circles, the reaction was cautious and divided, as many scientists struggled to reconcile the unusual size of the bones with established theories of human evolution, which at the time were still in their early stages and heavily influenced by limited fossil evidence. Some researchers argued that the bones could belong to a person with gigantism, a rare medical condition caused by hormonal imbalance that leads to abnormal growth, suggesting that the discovery represented an exceptional individual rather than a distinct population. Others proposed that measurement errors, distortion caused by fossilization, or misidentification of animal bones as human could explain the apparent size, emphasizing the need for careful reanalysis and verification. Unfortunately, much of the original Castelnau material was later lost, damaged, or dispersed among private collections and museum archives, making modern re-examination extremely difficult and leaving historians and scientists to rely largely on 19th century reports and sketches. This loss of physical evidence has fueled ongoing speculation, conspiracy theories, and alternative interpretations, as the absence of definitive material prevents conclusive resolution. Some researchers have suggested that the bones may have belonged to large Ice Age mammals that were mistakenly classified as human due to limited comparative collections available at the time, while others maintain that the anatomical features described in early reports were distinctly human and unlikely to have been misidentified. The broader context of the discovery is important, as the late 19th century was a period of intense debate about evolution, human origins, and racial classification, during which scientific objectivity was often influenced by political, cultural, and ideological agendas. Some scholars of the time were eager to find evidence supporting theories of multiple human races evolving separately, while others sought proof of progressive improvement from primitive to modern forms, making unusual discoveries like Castelnau highly sensitive and controversial. In addition to scientific debate, the Castelnau skeleton became entangled in popular culture, spiritualist movements, and pseudo-archaeological narratives that promoted ideas of lost giant races, vanished advanced civilizations, and suppressed discoveries. Over time, serious academic interest faded as more reliable fossil evidence emerged from Africa and Asia, shifting focus away from isolated European finds. Yet, the story of Castelnau never completely disappeared. It remained alive in obscure journals, private correspondence, and regional archives, periodically resurfacing in books, documentaries, and online discussions, questioning whether important discoveries had been ignored, forgotten, or deliberately marginalized. Modern scholars who have revisited archival material emphasize that while extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, the Castelnau case highlights weaknesses in early archaeological practice, including poor preservation methods, incomplete documentation, and limited peer review. It also reminds us that science is not a fixed collection of truths, but a process shaped by available evidence, institutional priorities, and human judgment. Without access to the original bones, it remains impossible to determine with certainty whether the Castelnau remains represented an unusually tall individual, a medical anomaly, a misidentified specimen, or something more significant. What is clear, however, is that the discovery challenged assumptions, provoked debate, and exposed the fragile foundations upon which early theories of human history were built. Standing today in the quiet landscapes where the bones were first uncovered, one is reminded that many chapters of humanity's past remain incomplete, scattered across forgotten archives and lost collections. The story of the Castelnau giant skeleton serves as a powerful reminder that history is not only written in textbooks, but also hidden in overlooked discoveries, unanswered questions, and vanished evidence. It invites us to remain curious, critical, and open-minded, recognizing that our understanding of human origins continues to evolve, shaped by both discovery and loss. The London Hammer and the Question of Time. In the dry hills of central Texas, near the small town of London, where limestone cliffs, winding streams, and scattered oak trees shape a quiet rural landscape, there exists one of the most controversial and misunderstood objects in modern archaeological debate: a simple iron hammer embedded within a block of hardened rock, an artifact that has been used for decades to question established timelines of human history and to fuel speculation about forgotten technologies and lost civilizations. The story begins in 1934 when a couple walking along Red Creek noticed an unusual stone formation partially enclosing what appeared to be a wooden handle and metal head, emerging naturally from the surrounding limestone deposits. Curious about its appearance, they collected the object and later broke away part of the rock, revealing a hammer that looked remarkably similar to 19th century tools used by American settlers and blacksmiths. First glance, the hammer did not appear ancient in any extraordinary way. It consisted of an iron head attached to a partially mineralized wooden handle, showing signs of corrosion and decay consistent with long-term burial. However, what made the object controversial was the claim that it had been found embedded within Cretaceous limestone, estimated to be more than 100 million years old. If true, this would imply that humans or human-like beings existed during the age of dinosaurs, a conclusion that contradicts all established scientific evidence. Supporters of alternative historical theories quickly promoted the object as proof that modern humans or advanced civilizations existed far earlier than mainstream archaeology accepts. The hammer became widely known as the London Hammer, circulating through books, lectures, and online platforms as an example of so-called out-of-place artifacts, objects that appear to exist in geological contexts where they should not belong. However, professional geologists and archaeologists approach the case with caution, pointing out that geological processes often create misleading appearances that can easily be misinterpreted by non-specialists. Detailed studies revealed that the surrounding rock was not ancient limestone formed millions of years ago, but rather a type of carbonate concretion, a natural mineral deposit that can form around objects buried in sediment within relatively short periods of time. These concretions develop when mineral-rich water flows through soil and rock, depositing calcium carbonate around organic or metallic materials, gradually encasing them in hardened stone-like shells. In environments such as Texas creek beds, where mineral-rich groundwater is common, such concretions can form in decades or centuries rather than millions of years. This process explains how a 19th century hammer could become enclosed within a solid rock mass without requiring extreme antiquity. Chemical analysis of the hammerhead showed that it was made of typical 19th century wrought iron containing impurities consistent with manufacturing methods of the late 1800s, further supporting the interpretation that the object belonged to the historic period. The wooden handle, partially preserved through mineralization, also matched known patterns of long-term burial in damp environments. Historical research revealed that the area around London, Texas, had been inhabited and worked by settlers, ranchers and builders throughout the 19th century, making it entirely plausible that a tool had been lost or discarded and later buried by sediment and mineral deposits. Flooding, erosion, and sediment accumulation along creek beds could easily have covered the hammer, allowing concretion to form around it over time. Despite these explanations, the London hammer continues to be cited in alternative literature as evidence of suppressed discoveries or flawed scientific models, illustrating how incomplete understanding of geological processes can lead to dramatic but inaccurate conclusions. The persistence of such interpretations reflects a broader human tendency to favour mysterious explanations over complex natural mechanisms. From a scientific perspective, the London hammer is valuable not because it rewrites history, but because it demonstrates how geological and chemical processes interact with human objects, creating natural illusions of extreme age. It serves as a teaching example in geology and archaeology courses, illustrating the importance of context, documentation, and multidisciplinary analysis. The controversy surrounding the hammer also highlights the challenges faced by researchers in communicating nuanced scientific explanations to the public, especially in an age where sensational claims spread rapidly through media and online platforms. Once a story becomes associated with mystery and conspiracy, correcting it becomes far more difficult. Modern researchers emphasize that no verified evidence exists of human-made tools from the age of dinosaurs, and that all reliable archaeological data places the emergence of tool-making hominins within the past few million years, not hundreds of millions. The London hammer fits comfortably within this framework as a historic period artifact altered by natural mineralization. Standing today near the quiet creek where the hammer was found, one can imagine how easily ordinary objects can become transformed by nature into misleading relics, acquiring false histories through time and interpretation. The story reminds us that understanding the past requires patience, skepticism, and careful examination of evidence rather than quick acceptance of extraordinary claims. The London hammer does not reveal a lost prehistoric civilization, but it reveals something equally important about human curiosity, belief, and the way stories evolve when science meets mystery. It teaches that the true wonder of archaeology lies not in rewriting reality, but in learning how nature and history together shape the objects we discover. The horned skulls of Pennsylvania and the power of forgotten stories. In the rolling hills and river valleys of western Pennsylvania, where forests stretch across quiet landscapes and ancient waterways once served as lifelines for indigenous communities, there emerged in the late 19th and early 20th centuries a series of strange reports that captured public imagination and continue to circulate today. Stories of human skulls discovered in burial mounds that appeared to possess horn-like protrusions growing from their foreheads, suggesting the existence of a forgotten people whose physical appearance did not match anything known in modern anthropology. These reports first appeared in regional newspapers, amateur excavation records, and personal journals during a period when thousands of Native American burial mounds across the eastern United States were being disturbed by farmers, collectors, and early archaeologists, often without proper documentation or scientific oversight. According to these accounts, several burial sites near rivers such as the Allegheny in Ohio yielded skeletons described as unusually tall and robust, with skulls bearing symmetrical bony growths that resembled small horns or pointed extensions. Some witnesses claimed that these skulls belonged to individuals over 2 meters in height and were buried with stone tools, ornaments, and ceremonial objects, suggesting a distinct and possibly powerful culture. At the time, professional archaeology in North America was still developing, and many excavations were conducted by hobbyists, landowners, or museum collectors who lacked standardized methods for recording context, preserving remains, or verifying interpretations. As a result, many finds were poorly documented, photographed inadequately, or simply removed and dispersed into private collections where their scientific value was largely lost. In the case of the so-called horned skulls, no verified specimens remain in major museum collections today, leaving modern researchers dependent on second-hand descriptions and fragmentary reports. This absence of physical evidence has made it impossible to confirm whether such skulls ever existed as described, or whether the reports were based on misunderstandings, exaggerations, or deliberate fabrication. Medical experts note that rare conditions such as osteomas, exostoses, and bone tumours can produce hard protrusions on the skull that, in certain cases, might resemble horn-like structures, especially when viewed without anatomical training. In addition, cultural practices such as cranial deformation, which involve shaping infants' skulls using bindings or boards, were practiced by several indigenous groups in North America and could create unusual head shapes that appeared unnatural to outsiders. Another important factor is post-burial damage and mineralization, which can distort skeletal remains over time, producing irregular formations that may be misinterpreted when excavated carelessly. Roots, rocks, and sediment pressure can reshape bones in ways that mimic biological growth. During the 19th century, popular fascination with giants, lost races, and biblical myths strongly influenced public interpretation of archaeological discoveries, encouraging sensational reporting and speculative conclusions. Newspapers often exaggerated findings to attract readers, while collectors promoted unusual artifacts to increase their perceived value. The idea of horned humans resonated with ancient legends found in various cultures, from Mesopotamian depictions of horned deities to medieval European myths about monstrous races, creating a narrative framework that made such claims appealing. Professional investigations conducted later by institutions such as the Smithsonian and state archaeological surveys found no credible evidence of a distinct horned human population in Pennsylvania or elsewhere in North America. Systematic excavations of burial mounds revealed remains consistent with known indigenous populations, displaying normal anatomical variation and cultural burial practices. Many early reports were found to be based on misidentified animal remains, distorted bones, or misunderstood medical conditions. Yet despite these findings, the story of the horned skulls continues to circulate, especially in alternative history literature and online communities, where it is often presented as evidence of suppressed discoveries or forgotten human species. This persistence reflects a broader human tendency to favour mysterious explanations over complex scientific ones, particularly when original evidence is missing. The horned skull legend also raises important ethical questions about the treatment of indigenous burial sites and ancestral remains, many of which were damaged or destroyed during early excavations driven by curiosity, profit, or colonial attitudes. Modern archaeology emphasises respectful collaboration with native communities and strict preservation standards, recognising that burial sites are sacred spaces, not sources of entertainment. From a historical perspective, the Pennsylvania Horned Skull reports illustrate how fragile our understanding of the past can be when documentation is incomplete and interpretation is influenced by cultural bias. They remind us that archaeology is not only about discovering objects, but about carefully reconstructing context, meaning, and human experience. Standing today in the quiet landscapes where these stories originated, it is difficult to separate fact from legend, science from imagination, and evidence from rumour. What remains is not proof of horned humans, but proof of how stories grow in the absence of clear records. The tale of the horned skulls serves as a lesson in critical thinking, reminding us that true understanding of human history requires patience, skepticism, and respect for both evidence and cultural heritage. It shows that sometimes the greatest mysteries are not hidden in the ground, but in the way people choose to remember and interpret what they find. The wheel ruts of Phrygia and the marks of forgotten journeys. Across the rocky highlands of central Turkey, in the ancient region once known as Phrygia, where wind-carved cliffs, volcanic plateaus, and wide valleys stretch beneath changing skies, there exists a network of strange parallel grooves cut deep into solid stone, marks that resemble the tracks of ancient wheels, and that have puzzled travellers, historians, and scientists for generations. These formations, often found carved into limestone and tough bedrock near ancient settlements, temples, and burial sites, appear as long, narrow channels running side by side, sometimes extending for hundreds of meters across hillsides, plains, and rocky outcrops, forming what look like prehistoric road systems frozen in stone. At first glance, the ruts resemble the worn paths left behind by heavy carts repeatedly travelling the same routes over long periods, slowly grinding their wheels into the surface until grooves were formed. In many places, the ruts are so deep and precise that they seem almost impossible to have been created without advanced tools or machinery, leading some observers to question whether they could truly be the result of simple wooden wagons and animal power. The most famous examples of these wheel ruts are found near the ancient city of Phrygian Midas, close to modern-day Yazulikaya, where monumental rock facades, tombs, and sanctuaries surround landscapes marked by dozens of intersecting tracks. Here, the ruts appear to converge, diverge, and overlap, suggesting complex traffic patterns and long-term use. Archaeological evidence indicates that Phrygia was an important cultural and economic centre between roughly 1200 and 600 BCE, inhabited by people who relied heavily on agriculture, trade, and transport networks to move grain, stone, timber, and other materials across difficult terrain. Carts pulled by oxen and horses would have been essential for daily life, construction, and commerce. Geological studies reveal that much of the region's bedrock consists of soft volcanic tuff, a material that is relatively easy to carve and erode when exposed to water, pressure, and repeated friction. Over centuries of use, even wooden wheels, reinforced with metal rims, could gradually cut into this soft stone, especially when combined with the abrasive effects of dust, sand, and rain. In wet conditions, tuff becomes even more vulnerable, allowing wheels to sink slightly and deepen existing tracks, creating self-reinforcing grooves that guide later vehicles along the same paths. This process would gradually transform ordinary dirt roads into permanent stone channels. The consistent spacing between many ruts corresponds closely to known axle widths of ancient carts, supporting the interpretation that they were created by repeated traffic rather than by unknown technologies. Some tracks even show signs of repair, redirection, and intentional modification, suggesting active maintenance by ancient road builders. However, not all ruts fit neatly into this explanation. Some appear to climb steep slopes where carts would have struggled to operate, while others cross rocky areas without clear connections to known settlements. In a few locations, ruts intersect in chaotic patterns that seem impractical for organised transport. These anomalies have fueled alternative theories proposing ritual pathways, quarrying tracks, or even traces of lost technologies. Some researchers suggest that certain ruts may have been carved deliberately to guide sledges transporting heavy stone blocks, rather than wheeled vehicles. Others propose that they served as drainage channels, boundary markers, or symbolic pathways linked to religious practices. In Phrygian culture, landscape modification often carried spiritual meaning, with rock-cut monuments, altars, and inscriptions integrated into natural features. It is therefore possible that some ruts had ceremonial or symbolic functions beyond transportation. Historical records and archaeological surveys show that Phrygian and later Roman engineers invested heavily in infrastructure, including roads, bridges, and water systems, reflecting advanced understanding of terrain management. The wheel ruts may represent early stages of this engineering tradition, preserved unusually well due to local geology. Over time, as trade routes shifted and new roads were built, many of these ancient paths were abandoned, leaving their stone scars exposed to weather and erosion. Centuries later, travellers encountering these grooves often attributed them to giants, gods, or supernatural forces, embedding them in folklore and local legend. Modern research using satellite imaging, GIS mapping, and experimental archaeology continues to study rut patterns, depth variation, and spatial relationships, revealing increasingly detailed pictures of ancient transport systems. These studies show that many ruts align with known trade routes, quarry sites, and agricultural centres, reinforcing their practical origins. Yet the fascination surrounding them persists because they represent something rarely preserved in archaeology: the physical traces of everyday movement, labour, and travel, etched permanently into the landscape. They are not monuments built to impress. They are byproducts of work, of routine, of necessity, of countless journeys made by ordinary people carrying food, stone, tools, and supplies across difficult terrain. Standing beside these ancient tracks today, one can imagine the slow creak of wooden carts, the sound of hooves on stone, the voices of drivers guiding animals through dust and rain, repeating the same journeys year after year. The wheel ruts of Phrygia remind us that civilization is shaped not only by kings and temples, but by roads, labour, and movement. They are records of persistence, adaptation, and human effort, carved unintentionally into stone by generations, who simply needed to move forward. They show that sometimes the most enduring monuments are not those built on purpose, but those created through everyday life. The Meisterprint and the illusion of impossible footsteps. In the remote desert landscapes of western Utah, where red sandstone cliffs rise above dry valleys and ancient seabeds lie exposed beneath open skies, there exists a small slab of rock that has been at the centre of intense controversy and misunderstanding for decades, an object often described as a fossilised shoe print containing a crushed trilobite, seemingly suggesting that a human walked across the earth hundreds of millions of years ago. This object, known as the Meisterprint, was discovered in 1968 by William J. Meister while searching for trilobite fossils in the Wheeler Shale Formation near Antelope Springs, a geological deposit dating back approximately 500 million years to the Cambrian period, when complex life was just beginning to emerge in Earth's oceans. While splitting shale slabs to reveal fossils, Meister noticed a formation that resembled the outline of a sandal or shoe sole, complete with what appeared to be a heel and toe region, and within this shape lay a crushed trilobite fossil, an extinct marine arthropod that lived long before any land animals existed. Photographs of the specimen quickly spread through alternative science publications and religious creationist circles, where it was promoted as evidence that humans existed during prehistoric times, directly contradicting evolutionary timelines. Supporters argued that the trilobite appeared to be crushed beneath the sole, implying that a human foot or shoe had stepped on it while the sediment was still soft. However, professional geologists and paleontologists who examined the slab reached very different conclusions, explaining that the formation was a natural fracture pattern produced by the way shale splits along bedding planes. The Wheeler Shale is known for breaking into irregular shapes that sometimes resemble familiar objects, including leaves, shells, or footprints, through a process called pareidolia, where the human brain instinctively interprets random patterns as meaningful images. Detailed analysis showed that the so-called sole lacked any consistent pressure deformation, toe impressions, stitching marks, or material residue that would indicate an actual footprint or manufactured object. Instead, it consisted of natural cleavage surfaces combined with erosion patterns that happened to form a roughly shoe-like outline. The trilobite inside the formation was not crushed by pressure from above, but had already been fossilized within the sediment before later fracturing exposed and fragmented it. Microscopic examination revealed no signs of compression consistent with stepping force, further weakening claims of human involvement. In addition, no accompanying footprints, tool marks, or cultural artifacts have ever been found in the same geological layer, which would be expected if humans had been present. Geological context is critical in such cases, and the surrounding sediment clearly indicates a marine environment that existed hundreds of millions of years before land plants, reptiles, or mammals evolved. At the time these sediments were deposited, the region that is now Utah was submerged beneath shallow seas, inhabited only by simple marine organisms. There were no forests, no animals walking on land, no breathable atmosphere suitable for humans. Despite this, the Meister print continues to circulate in books, videos, and online discussions as evidence of out-of-place artifacts, demonstrating how visual similarity can overpower scientific explanation in public perception. Psychologists note that humans are naturally inclined to recognize familiar shapes, especially those related to their own bodies, which makes footprint-like formations particularly persuasive. Once such interpretations are emotionally accepted, they become difficult to abandon even when contrary evidence is presented. From a scientific perspective, the Meister print provides an important lesson in the necessity of contextual analysis, showing that individual objects cannot be understood in isolation, but must be evaluated within their geological, biological, and environmental framework. It also illustrates how misinformation can persist when sensational narratives are repeated without verification. Standing today in the silent desert where the slab was found, surrounded by rocks that record 500 million years of Earth's history, one is reminded of the immense timescales involved in shaping our planet. The Meister print does not reveal a lost human presence in deep time, but it reveals something equally fascinating about human perception, belief, and the desire to find meaning in randomness. It reminds us that true wonder lies not in forcing extraordinary conclusions, but in understanding the natural processes that quietly create illusions of mystery across millions of years. The story of the Meister print ultimately teaches that patience, evidence, and critical thinking are essential tools for exploring the past, guiding us through a world where appearances can be deeply misleading. The burnt bone humanoid and the first attempts to represent ourselves. Deep within the layers of prehistoric caves, rock shelters, and ancient living sites scattered across Europe, Asia, and parts of Africa, archaeologists have uncovered small, fragile objects that at first glance appear simple and unremarkable, yet upon closer inspection reveal something profound about the human mind. Small carvings made from animal bone, ivory, or antler, shaped into crude human-like figures and often darkened by fire and time. Among these discoveries is a category of artifacts sometimes referred to as burnt bone humanoid carvings, small figurines created tens of thousands of years ago by early humans who had no written language, no permanent cities, and no formal artistic traditions, yet felt an instinctive need to represent themselves and their world through symbolic objects. These carvings are typically found in Paleolithic contexts, dating back between 30,000 and 40,000 years, and are often associated with hearths, living floors, and tool-making areas, suggesting that they were created and used within everyday domestic spaces rather than in isolated ceremonial settings. The bone used to create these figures usually came from animals hunted for food, such as mammoths, reindeer, bison, or deer, indicating that early humans carefully selected materials that were readily available and meaningful within their environment. After cleaning and preparing the bone, artisans shaped it using stone blades, scrapers, and burins, slowly removing material and refining contours through patient, repetitive effort. Many of these figurines show simplified human forms with elongated bodies, rounded heads, and minimal facial features, emphasizing posture and presence rather than detailed anatomy. Some display exaggerated characteristics, while others appear abstract, reflecting different symbolic intentions or cultural traditions. The darkened, burnt appearance found on many of these carvings is believed to result from prolonged exposure to hearth fires, either intentionally during ritual activities or accidentally through repeated use and storage near flames. Experimental archaeology has demonstrated that heating bone under controlled conditions can harden its surface and deepen its colour, potentially enhancing durability and aesthetic contrast. This suggests that some prehistoric artists may have deliberately used fire as part of the creative process, integrating heat treatment into their craft. The presence of fire-modified figurines indicates an advanced understanding of material properties and thermal effects, revealing technical knowledge far beyond basic survival skills. These small humanoid figures represent one of the earliest known forms of symbolic self-representation, marking a crucial transition in human cognitive development. By creating images of themselves or imagined beings, early humans demonstrated abstract thinking, self-awareness, and the ability to conceptualize identity beyond immediate physical experience. Anthropologists believe such objects may have served multiple purposes, functioning as ritual tools, protective charms, teaching aids, or representations of ancestors and spiritual entities. Some researchers proposed that they were used in storytelling, allowing elders to pass down myths, survival knowledge, and social values to younger generations through visual aids. Others suggest they played roles in fertility rites, healing ceremonies, or group bonding rituals, reinforcing shared beliefs and emotional connections within small communities. The fact that many figurines show signs of repeated handling, smoothing, and wear indicates that they were not simply decorative objects, but were actively used in daily or ceremonial life. Chemical analysis of surface residues on some specimens has revealed traces of oils, pigments, and organic substances, suggesting that they were occasionally painted, polished, or anointed as part of ritual practices. The geographical distribution of burnt bone humanoid carvings across distant regions suggests that symbolic behaviour emerged independently in multiple populations, reflecting a universal human impulse toward creativity and meaning-making. Sites in France, Germany, Siberia, and Central Asia have all yielded similar objects, despite cultural differences and vast geographical separation. This convergence implies that symbolic art was not a rare accident, but a fundamental feature of early human societies. The creation of humanoid carvings also required time, concentration, and patience, resources that would only be invested if communities had achieved a degree of stability and cooperation. This indicates that even in harsh Ice Age environments, early humans were capable of organising their lives in ways that allowed space for creativity and reflection. In this sense, these figurines mark the emergence of culture as a defining human trait. They show that long before written history, humans were already exploring questions of identity, mortality, and belonging through material expression. Standing before these fragile artifacts in museum displays today, it is difficult not to feel a deep connection to their creators, individuals who lived in worlds radically different from ours, yet shared the same desire to understand themselves and leave traces of their existence. The burnt bone humanoid carvings remind us that humanity's story is not only one of technological progress and survival, but also one of imagination, symbolism, and emotional depth. They represent the moment when humans first began to see themselves not merely as biological creatures, but as beings capable of reflection, memory, and meaning. Through fire, bone, and careful hands, our ancestors shaped the earliest mirrors of the human soul. Frozen deer and the silent rituals of the Ice Age. Across the frozen plains and ancient permafrost regions of northern Eurasia and Siberia, where winter lasts most of the year and the ground remains locked in ice for thousands of seasons, archaeologists and paleontologists have occasionally encountered discoveries so strange and delicate that they seem almost impossible to believe. Moments where nature has preserved not only bones and tools, but entire scenes of prehistoric life suspended in time. Among these rare finds are frozen deer and reindeer remains, discovered alongside carved wooden staffs, decorated bones, or stone objects arranged in deliberate positions, suggesting that these animals were not simply victims of hunting accidents, but participants in ritual practices carried out by Ice Age humans tens of thousands of years ago. In several Siberian and Arctic sites dating between 20,000 and 40,000 years ago, researchers have uncovered well-preserved carcasses of deer buried in frozen soil with unusual accompanying artifacts, including polished antler rods, engraved sticks, and stone blades placed carefully near the head, chest, or legs. The extreme cold of these regions acted as a natural freezer, preventing decay and preserving soft tissues, fur, and even stomach contents, offering rare insight into both the physical condition of the animals and the circumstances surrounding their deaths. Radiocarbon dating indicates that many of these remains belong to periods when human hunter-gatherer groups depended heavily on reindeer and deer for food, clothing, shelter, and tools, making these animals central to survival and cultural identity. Yet the careful placement of ritual objects suggests that hunting was not viewed merely as an act of killing, but as a spiritual exchange between humans and animals, governed by beliefs, taboos, and ceremonial practices. Ethnographic studies of modern Arctic and Siberian indigenous cultures reveal long-standing traditions in which animals are honoured through prayers, offerings, and symbolic gestures after being hunted, reflecting a worldview in which animals are considered sentient beings with spiritual significance. Many anthropologists believe that similar beliefs existed among Ice Age communities, forming some of humanity's earliest religious systems. The carved staffs found near some frozen deer are often decorated with geometric patterns, animal motifs, or abstract symbols, indicating intentional design and symbolic meaning. Microscopic analysis shows that these staffs were shaped with stone tools, polished through repeated handling, and sometimes treated with oils or resins to preserve the wood. Their function remains debated, with theories ranging from hunting charms and ceremonial wands to status symbols held by shamans or community leaders. Some researchers propose that these objects were used in rituals intended to ensure successful future hunts, appease animal spirits, or guide the soul of the slain animal into the afterlife. Others suggest they were markers of seasonal migrations, memorials to important hunts, or teaching tools used to pass down spiritual knowledge. The positioning of the deer bodies themselves often appears deliberate, with legs folded, heads oriented towards specific directions, and internal organs intact, indicating that they were placed rather than abandoned. This careful treatment contrasts with typical butchering sites, where bones are scattered and show heavy cut marks from meat processing. In ritual contexts, only select parts of the animal were removed, while the rest was preserved as an offering. Geological analysis suggests that many of these sites were located near sacred landscapes, such as river crossings, mountain passes, or prominent rock formations, places that held spiritual significance and were believed to connect the human world with the spirit realm. These locations may have functioned as ceremonial centers visited repeatedly over generations. The frozen deer discoveries revealed that Ice Age humans possessed complex belief systems combining ecological knowledge, social organization, and spiritual philosophy. They did not see themselves as separate from nature, but as part of a living network where survival depended on respect, balance, and reciprocity. The ritual staff symbolizes authority, memory, and continuity, linking individual hunts to collective tradition. It represents the role of spiritual specialists who mediated between the physical and invisible worlds. Modern laboratory studies have detected traces of pigments, plant resins, and animal fats on some staffs, suggesting that they were decorated and anointed during ceremonies. These substances may have enhanced sensory experiences through smell, colour, and texture, deepening emotional engagement in ritual performances. The emotional dimension of these practices should not be underestimated. For communities living in extreme cold and constant danger, ritual offered psychological stability, social cohesion, and a sense of meaning in an unpredictable world. Honouring animals through ceremony helped transform death into continuity and loss into purpose. Standing today in climate-controlled laboratories where frozen remains are slowly thawed and studied under microscopes, scientists are reminded that these discoveries are not merely biological specimens, but remnants of spiritual worlds long vanished. Each preserved deer and staff represents a moment when humans paused amid survival struggles to acknowledge something greater than themselves. The frozen deer with ritual staff reveals that spirituality did not emerge with temples or scriptures, but with hunters standing in snow-covered landscapes, whispering prayers over fallen animals and placing symbols of respect beside them. It shows that humanity's earliest religions were shaped by ice, hunger, gratitude, and awe. Through these silent ceremonies, Ice Age people expressed the same fundamental questions that still guide us today: how to live, how to take life responsibly, and how to find meaning in a fragile world. Denisova Cave and the hidden branch of humanity. High in the Altai mountains of southern Siberia, where icy winds sweep across forested slopes and snow covers the land for much of the year, there lies a modest limestone cave overlooking the Anhui River, a place that appears ordinary to passing travellers, yet holds within its dark chambers one of the most extraordinary discoveries ever made in the study of human origins. This place is known as Denisova Cave, and within its layered sediments, scientists uncovered evidence of a previously unknown type of ancient human, a population so genetically distinct that it forced researchers to redraw the evolutionary map of humanity and reconsider long-held assumptions about how our species came to be. For thousands of years, Denisova Cave served as a seasonal shelter for animals and humans alike, providing protection from harsh weather and predators. Over time, wind, water, and biological activity slowly deposited layers of sediment inside. The cave, creating a natural archive of environmental and cultural history stretching back more than 300,000 years. Systematic excavations began in the late 20th century, revealing stone tools, animal bones, ornaments, and fragments of human remains scattered throughout different layers, indicating repeated occupation by various hominin groups. In 2008, researchers discovered a tiny fragment of a finger bone buried deep within one of these layers, so small and fragile that it initially seemed insignificant. Yet when scientists extracted DNA from this fragment, they made a discovery that stunned the scientific world. The genetic material did not match modern humans, nor did it match Neanderthals, who were already known to have inhabited parts of Eurasia. Instead, it represented an entirely new human lineage now known as Denisovans. Further analysis of additional bone fragments and teeth confirmed that Denisovans were closely related to Neanderthals, sharing a common ancestor, yet had followed a separate evolutionary path for hundreds of thousands of years. They were not a minor variation, they were a distinct branch of humanity. Remarkably, although Denisovan physical remains are extremely rare, their genetic legacy is still alive today. Modern populations in parts of Asia, Melanesia, and Oceania carry Denisovan DNA, proving that these ancient humans interbred with our ancestors and contributed to the genetic makeup of present-day people. In some populations, Denisovan genes influence immune function, altitude adaptation, and metabolism, demonstrating that their legacy continues to shape human biology. One of the most mysterious aspects of Denisova Cave is the advanced nature of the artifacts found alongside Denisovan remains. Excavations uncovered finely crafted stone tools, polished bone needles, pendants made from animal teeth, and bracelets carved from rare green chlorite, materials that required long-distance transport and sophisticated workmanship. Some of these objects date back more than 40,000 years, overlapping with early modern humans, raising questions about who created them. Did Denisovans possess symbolic thinking, artistic expression, and complex social structures similar to Homo sapiens? Or were these artifacts produced by modern humans who later occupied the cave? The evidence remains debated. Recent studies suggest that Denisovans were capable of advanced craftsmanship and cultural behaviour, challenging outdated views that portrayed ancient humans as intellectually inferior. Another remarkable discovery at Denisova Cave was the identification of a hybrid individual whose DNA revealed that her mother was a Neanderthal and her father was a Denisovan. This finding provided direct proof that different human groups did not live in isolation, but interacted, migrated, and formed relationships across vast regions. It revealed that human evolution was not a straight line, but a tangled network of populations constantly mixing and diverging. Environmental data extracted from cave sediments show that Denisovans survived through multiple climate cycles, adapting to cold glacial periods and warmer interglacial phases. They hunted large mammals, gathered plants, and developed flexible survival strategies that allowed them to persist in challenging mountain environments. Despite these achievements, Denisovans eventually disappeared as a distinct population. The reasons remain uncertain. Climate change, competition with modern humans, disease, and demographic decline may all have played roles. Unlike Homo sapiens, Denisovans left no known settlements, paintings, or monuments, making them nearly invisible in the archaeological record. They survive mainly through genetic traces hidden within modern genomes. Denisova Cave itself continues to produce new discoveries as technology advances. Sediment DNA analysis now allows scientists to detect ancient human presence even without bones, revealing that multiple hominin groups alternated occupation of the cave over tens of thousands of years. This makes Denisova one of the most important sites for understanding deep human history. Standing at the cave entrance today, overlooking forests and rivers shaped by millennia of change, it is difficult to imagine that within these quiet rocks lies evidence of lost relatives whose existence was unknown until very recently. The Denisova anomaly reminds us that humanity's story is far more complex than once believed. We are not the product of a single line of descent, but the result of many forgotten peoples whose lives, struggles, and knowledge are woven into our own. Their bones may be gone, their names may be lost, but their legacy lives on inside us.